Hi, good morning. I see we do have quite a few number of early participants. I want to welcome you all to our first session of the day. If you were just with me in the opening remarks, you heard about the very busy, exciting day we had yesterday and the very interesting, exciting day we have lined up today. So, before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that as a workshop, what that means is that you do have the ability to turn on your microphone and ask questions during the session. If you're brave enough, you're also able to turn on your video camera, though I do know that that might be a bit daunting. But again, if you do want to turn on your mic when you have questions, that would be fantastic. For those of us who are shy, you can also submit a question in the Q&A panel. Just on the right-hand side of the main screen in the live Q&A button, you click on that, enter your question and click send. And then at the end of the session, I will read out the question to Phil and Beth. Now, I see we've had quite a few participants arrive. I know that we're likely to get more, but I do want to get things underway. So if you're joining us now, you're here for the workshop on creating your next generation operating model for the HR function. The people that are going to be facilitating this is Brenda Redman, MBA and CHPR, CMC, CHE for Senior Consultant for HR for Chazey Partners, and Phil Searle, the founder and CEO of Chazey Partners. Brenda and Phil, please do take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Jordan. Good morning, everybody. And yes, welcome to this workshop this morning. As Jordan said, my name's Phil Searle, and I'll be co-presenting with my colleague Brenda, and we'll introduce ourselves in a little bit more detail in a second. But just as a double checkpoint again, the workshop today is on creating your next generation operating model for the HR function. So it's really about future HR, next gen HR, and that's going to be the focus of the conversation. And Brenda and I will be talking through the various sections involved with that. Okay. So what's the focus of the session today? So we're going to be talking a little bit about, I mentioned about the service delivery model and the various roles, mix of roles between business partners, the COEs to the extent that you have COEs, and back office service delivery, shared services. We're also going to be talking about, yes, that topic, the impacts of COVID-19, but with a specific emphasis on how HR and organizations from an employee perspective have adapted and are adapting to the impact of COVID-19. Then we'll also be talking about the significant growth of digitalization, intelligent automation, which is transforming everything, as we all know, our lives, these sessions, remote sessions, virtual working, artificial intelligence, etc. So I'll be touching on that as well as part of the session today. And then we'll be talking about how HR can be, can move itself to be that true business partner that it's promised to be for a long time, and for a large degree hasn't yet attained. And Brenda will be talking about that a little bit more detail. But it's about how HR can become, more smarter, more agile, more strategic, more digital, savvy and enabled. And so that's the focus. And within that, we have a number of different topics. We'll start off by defining the role of HR, or at least a definition, a version of a definition of the role of HR. Then we'll be talking about the next generation service delivery, managing the new norm, including COVID-19. I mentioned digital, and then at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about practicalities about what transformation might entail and how you might start and look at your team mix. And then we'll close with critical success factors. Now this is a workshop, so we can take questions live if you'd like to ask them during the session, or we can take them at the end as we move at the end. And as Jordan mentioned, if you wanted to post a question on the chat, you can do that, and we can take those at the end as well. Okay, so as I mentioned, my name is Phil Searle. I'm the founder and CEO of Chazey Partners. I've founded actually Chazey Partners about 15 years ago, back in England, after I left operational roles. Prior to that, I was at 3Com Corporation back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then I was a group CFO of Sendent TDS International, which is the travel business that used to be part of Sendent's, now called Travelport, which includes a number of travel things like WorldSpan, Galileo, cheaptickets.com, eBookers, Orbitz. Those were part of the group when I was there. And then so I was in sort of corporate line practitioner roles for many, many years prior to forming Chazey, and then set up Chazey to move into consulting. And with that, I will hand to Brenda, who can introduce herself as well. Brenda?
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever it is in your part of the world. My name is Brenda, and I joined Chazey Partners about 4 years ago. Prior to that, I was the Chief Human Resources Officer for the University of California in Davis, where I led transformational change in the areas of academic and the health system. We actually implemented a PeopleSoft system across 25,000 employees, academics, and staff within the health system and the organization as a whole. Prior to that, I was the VP of Talent Strategies for Alberta Health Services. We brought together about 232 separate entities under one umbrella, which then formed the organization for health services in all of Alberta, Canada, for 120,000 employees and physicians. So I've been leading transformational change in those environments for a number of years now. So nice to meet everybody, and looking forward to today.
Thanks, Brenda. Okay, so look, just a quick touch on Chazey. I mentioned that founded about 15 years ago, headquartered in California, but we actually have locations throughout the world, including in Canada, Latin America, and Europe. We have three main focus lines for delivery, what I would call traditional shared services, where we do end-to-end implementations of multifunctional GBS models. We also, on the right-hand side, do broader transformation, which include M&As, business continuity planning, operating model transformations. And in the middle, we have our robotic process automation service offering, which we've been involved with for about the last 5 years, where we can do anything around robotic process automation, from suitability assessment, vendor selection, design of pilots and proofs of concepts, design of operating models, bot development, and training. This is just a splash of some of our clients. I would say probably about half of these involve HR, either as a functional specific or as part of a multifunctional engagement. So many of these were either, for example, Brenda mentioned University UC Davis. So we supported UC Davis in the implementation of the new HR operating model and PeopleSoft. We've done a lot of work with the University of California, mainly in HR, actually, including UCSF and some other locations. And in the middle, you saw the CR multinational expertise. And again, many of these involved HR, including the likes of Gilead, Panasonic, Varian, Travelport. All of these involved different versions of HR. And so I say about half of these, but you hopefully recognize many of these companies. Okay, now we get into the meat of the presentation. So this is a slide that I've personally been using for about 15 years, and it actually applies to different roles. It applies to finance or HR or procurement, and it really is sort of the role of HR on the slide. And we could discuss and debate whether this is right or not, but it's just a picture. So really, there's sort of four perspectives of key responsibilities, I should say, for an HR function. There is strategy, so supporting the strategic business, whatever your business is, be it in public or private sector. What is the strategy? What is the vision and goal of that operation or enterprise? So HR has a role supporting that. Of course, it has a role at the more operational role, supporting decision making at the line level, at the business unit level, at the school level, or whatever it might be. That's the decision support role, which is less about the enterprise-wide strategy, more about the operational decision support, although clearly they overlap to some degree. The bottom, there's a compliance responsibility for HR to make sure we stay in compliance with employment laws, enterprise laws, health and safety to some degree, or whatever the legal requirements are around the HR aspects. You clearly have other aspects of finance, etc., but there's compliance. And then there's delivering processes and services, which you see on the left. And then you sort of see these four main blocks. So you've got the back office, so which is really your more traditional transaction administrative services around HR. So that's like, elements of pre-screening. It could be elements of performance appraisal at the early stages. It could be people administration, organizational management. It could be benefits administration and payroll. Those sort of things that are in the back office would go into this bottom left-hand box. Every element of the HR service has more back office and sort of front office elements, but the back office elements are around the processing, the transaction of getting things done, basically. On the right, on the bottom right, you have your more COEs, which tend to be more, as it says, more the expertise areas of providing specialist HR strategy, research, advisory skills. Tend to be more centralized, but still more closely linked with decision support and strategy than the back office. Then, of course, you have your HR business partners, which are the internal consultants to the business. They work directly with operational leaders, tend to be more decentralized in delivery, absolutely need functional expertise, analytical skills, and strong interpersonal skills. And those business partners are supported by the back office and the COEs. And then in the top right, you have your strategic governance, which is your HR strategy supporting the overall enterprise or the organization, which is policies, planning and governance, support for vision, mission strategy, a longer term perspective, etc. So each of these is different, and to some extent is exclusive, but they clearly overlap. And then right in the middle, you have data and information, especially in today's environment, that supports everything. So this is just the role of HR on a page, which has some different aspects to it and different responsibilities, which can be mutually exclusive to some degree, but they also overlap, and you need to have one leverage the other. So we find this quite useful. This is another area I just wanted to touch on. I'm not going to go through everything on the previous slide. I'm not going to go through everything on here, but this definition of decision support is something I've found to be quite grey. So what is decision support? If you look at the Oxford English Dictionary as an example, it defines a decision as a conclusion or resolution reached after consideration, or the action or process of deciding something. The same dictionary defines support as giving assistance, encouragement, or approval to, or confirming or backing up something. So having looked at those two, decision support may be defined as the assistance given to help consider and then confirm a particular conclusion or decision. In HR, this is the support given to the enterprise or organization's business, commercial, and operational activities. It's the support to the business or the operation to make decisions. One of the critical success factors is how influential is HR in supporting decision-making? How proactive or reactive is it? How strategic is that decision-making? And then ultimately, what is the return on that investment? And that applies to decision support in any function, HR, finance, procurement, or whatever. You don't actually have to, there's no legal requirement or compliance requirement that says you have to have an HR decision support function. But if you're going to invest in a decision support function, it needs to add value. So what is that value? How is it supporting decision-making in the organization? How is HR adding value in a proactive way to the enterprise? So just think about that as you move forward with your operating model, which we'll dive down a little bit more detail with Brenda shortly. Okay, so I'm going to talk on the slide here just about some of the latest trends, and then I'll hand over to Brenda to drill down a little bit more on HR. So, you know, what's going on out there in the world? Well, as we all know, a great deal right now. But clearly the scope and responsibility of HR is and should be expanding, and it is and should become more integrated with the business and cooperative with the business. There's this concept of one office that you may have heard about, which is more of an integration of the functions, HR, finance, procurement, IT, facilities, etc., closer to the front office, which is the core business decisions or core business operations. This is a concept of one office. That doesn't mean generalization, but it just means closer integration between functions. And HR, as I've just touched on, needs to be taking more of a role around decision support and strategy and business partnering. And again, Brenda will talk about that shortly. There's clearly a great deal of innovation and productivity going on. And I've mentioned data, the capture analysis of data, big data you sometimes hear for better, for worse as an expression, but there is a lot of data. Then there's new technologies, ERP, which has been around for a long time, which is SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards or whatever. But in the more recent time, and we'll come back to this, there's new digitalization, robotic process automation, intelligent automation, of course, social media and mobile. Everybody carries one of these around. So if you haven't worked out how to start integrating both your technology and your service to mobile, then you need to start thinking about it. Broader speaking, business process outsourcing, which has been prevalent for the last 10 years or so in HR, finance, etc. There is a slowdown reversal of some of that, combined with a couple of things: a desire to bring things closer to the business, and to some degree, the opportunity around robotic process automation or arbitrage, which I'll talk a little about later. There's an accelerated development of those COEs I mentioned, and providing value-added services to the business, sometimes part of a global business services trend, sometimes as a functional trend within HR. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Growing recognition, acceptance, and leveraging of what is called the hybrid workforce. What that means is the mix between human activity and people and technology, be that on the desktop or more broadly speaking. There's a hybrid workforce which has an appropriate mix of human activity and effort versus digitally driven or technical driven effort. And obviously the goal there is to have the humans to be involved more in the sort of value adding decision making, knowledge based, and less in the routine as much as possible. And of course, finally, the global pandemic, which has had a fundamental change to the way we work, and is likely to have an ongoing impact, and is probably accelerating trends, well, not probably, definitely accelerating trends that were already in place. So those are some of the key trends we're seeing out there. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand over to Brenda, who's going to talk a little bit more about the workforce of the future. Brenda?
Okay, thank you, Phil. Okay, so in terms of trends and what we've been seeing in the past, I think those of you that work in HR, you'll have heard this already, you know, that the trends are that senior executives are wanting HR to be more effective. People in HR are often treated as separate conversations. You know, the people agenda is about leadership and about training and development, and the HR agenda is often about administrative functions. HR is often out of the loop on strategic issues. And I think that's a really important one. When HR is out of the loop on strategic issues, it's hard to have that input. And so you end up with results like we're looking at today. So this is a 2020 study from Deloitte that on the left-hand side, you'll see that senior executives are still saying that up to about 60% of the executives are saying that if HR doesn't modernize, it's going to become redundant. On the right-hand side, you'll see that HR itself is saying that almost that same amount, 56%, are saying that without having automation and AI, it will be the biggest disruptor in terms of how we move forward in the future. So we're hearing, the trend's been around for a while, we're still hearing it, and we've got to modernize HR in order to move forward. Next slide, please, Phil. Okay, on the right-hand side, you'll see the perceived importance of the organizational readiness in all of this year's trends actually exceeds the readiness for it. So if you look at well-being, if you look at belonging, you look at knowledge management, look all the way down the list. Everybody's saying it's very important, but are their organizations ready? And they're saying their organizations aren't ready. On the left-hand side, you'll see the three domains for reinvention, and for the three approaches to change. So regardless of what approach we take and which domains we use and how we do it, we must involve technology, and we must be bold enough for the challenges to meet the challenges that are presented around the new social organizations and the reinvention of our organizations as a whole. Refreshing really means we're going to update and improve the current. Rewiring means we're going to make new connections. And how are we going to do that? And how will that help us to change the strategic direction? And recoding means embracing technology as key and actually implementing technology as part of our new solution moving forward. So again, Phil's going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about going digital. Next slide, please, Phil. So if we think about the HR strategy framework, we think about defining the value, aligning HR services, and then delivering value. So when we look at each one of those quadrants, if we can think through our organization today and think it forward in terms of how we define the value, how we align those HR services, and then how we deliver that value to the organization, we're setting ourselves up more strategically to support the organization as a whole. Next slide, please, Phil. Sorry, I've got a croaky throat today. So here's a transformed HR operating model. If you look to the top where it says HR leadership, HR leadership really owns the success of the HR strategy organization-wide. You'll see on the left-hand side, they have a very close connection with the business executives of the organization. They need to be in touch with them. Communication needs to be from the execs within the HR leadership team as a whole. So basically, HR leadership needs to be sitting at the executive table. You'll see below that where senior leadership has a strategic and tactical role to play. And so when you look at the HR business partners, the centers of expertise, the shared services organization, really the senior leadership needs to be able to provide that input. The communication needs to be two-way between the business partners, the centers of expertise, shared services, and HR leadership. So taking direction as well as providing advice, communications. On the right-hand side, you'll see that the operational arm of the HR organization is largely owned by the shared services organization. And again, Phil's going to talk about that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more down into the presentation. So next slide, Phil, please. Okay, so again, just repeating, HR leadership takes ownership of the organizational strategy and the plan, and it delivers the input. The business partners are very much connected to the business. They align the business objectives with the employees and the management and formulate the partnerships across the HR function. So they're really the glue to the organization in terms of ensuring that they're connected, that we're connected to the business at a tactical level. The centers of expertise, these are our professionals that have deep functional specialty, and they work with the customer and design and develop HR solutions. They also proactively identify trends and interfaces. So they may be doing some research, some training, some development, and they connect very closely with our OD organization within any business. And then on the right-hand side is the HR shared services, and that's the operational hub that I mentioned in the last slide. And they're the ones that are responsible for delivering on the policies and the programs and that are developed within the Center of Excellence. And they're designed around the service level tiers. And we'll talk about the tiers in a minute as well. Next slide, please, Phil. Okay. All right, so how are we navigating the new norm? So this won't be foreign to you that are on the call today. 95% of organizations, when COVID came into effect, asked staff to work from home. So what does that really mean for us? Short term, there was some social distancing strategies that were put in place, spreading staff across extended shifts, reducing the staffing to essential services, mandatory work from home, staggering shift and end times, and to avoid peak and rush hours. Those were some of the social distancing strategies. Some of the other workforce strategies were deferring discretionary travel, shutting down certain locations, providing access to PPE, increasing sanitation at facilities, reducing the number of events. So again, this won't be foreign to any of you. I'm sure you've all had to employ some or all of those strategies in your own organizations. Next slide, please, Phil. So what do we know? So what we've learned from what we've seen so far is that our conventional wisdom's being challenged by the opportunities that have faced us during and it will be after the pandemic as well. So our business continuity planning is important. Digitization and virtualization, that'll become a part of our life. It's the way things are going to move in the future. And organizations are reevaluating their service delivery models, which is what we're here to talk to you about today. What we really need is a strong operating model with governance, end-to-end process design, documentation, performance management framework, data management, and administration. All of those sections of service delivery need to be considered. Virtual shared services is becoming a reality. It's going to have to leverage a robust client interaction framework and governance and technology. And we need to ensure that our shared services organization and our model is going to be efficient while retaining redundant capacity. And what does that mean? That really means that when we look at our shared services, we're going to have to start reworking, rewiring, and determining how we organize ourselves, where we put our investments from an HR perspective to ensure that we're being the most effective and efficient we can. That'll include training, development, hiring, all of the things that we need to ensure that our shared services is going to be robust. Next slide, please, Phil. Okay. So engaging the remote workforce is going to be a key priority as we move forward to managing the new norm. From a people perspective, there's going to need to be clear KPIs and expectations. They're going to need to know what we're expecting of them. So if they're working remotely, or if they're working, 1 day a week in the office and 4 days a week at home, or fully remotely, they need to understand what's expected of them. We need to figure out ways to build trust and empathy. Feedback, that's important as well. Just because they're working at home doesn't mean they don't need feedback. They need feedback in order to improve, just like they would need if they were in an office environment. We need to provide training, rehearsing and scenario planning. So what does it look like for them? How do we onboard new employees, for example? And when we onboard a new employee, what does that look like for that new employee? How are they going to be successful? Processes. We need to have a look at our processes. We need to determine which are likely to be impacted the most. We need to forecast the staff that we need, and we need to ensure that we've got process adjustments and monitoring. So are we mapping them? Do we know where the handoffs are? Are we sure that we know what we should be doing in order to, again, support our people to ensure that they understand what's expected of them? And then technology. Technology is obviously a main part of this, but I always say that technology won't solve all your problems. There needs to be a huge focus on change management, supporting the organization as we move into new technologies, new ways of communicating, new workforce productivity tools, setting up our home offices, and working through what we already know in terms of RPA and using automation to our advantage. So with that, Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you. Next slide, please.
Thanks, man. I'm sorry about the up and down with the slides there with me. I'm going to mute myself.
That's okay. I didn't know if we were going backwards or forwards, but that's fine. Thank you. So I'll turn it over to you, Phil.
Yeah, I'll just pause there in case there are any questions as before we move to the next section. So if there are any questions, this is a live workshop. You can go ahead and ask, or you can send a message, or if Jordan lets us know if there are any questions, or we can move on. But I'll just pause for a second just in case.
Hi, Phil. So I have seen a couple of questions come through wanting to know if people are getting copies of the slides, and I would like to, I've told them that they will be able to reach out to you via the meeting hub on the main page, either reaching out to Brenda or Phil, and you will be able to share that with them. Is that the best advice? Yeah,
although interestingly, yes, exactly. They can reach out directly or through the hub. I did notice that my email address is wrong. My name is Searle with an E at the end of it. So we'll correct that. So it's philsearle@chazeypartners.com if anybody wants to connect with me directly. I just saw that as I was presenting that, so that's an error. But otherwise, you can either go through the meeting hub or you can go direct. But we absolutely we can share the slides for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, we'll keep moving then, and we'll take questions at the end as we move through here. Okay, so the next section is around going digital, which is obviously a huge part of next generation. In fact, some people have sort of asked me what's the difference between current generation and future generation HR. I think there's probably a couple of things I would say, and Brenda's touched on these already. One, it's really about HR moving to be this strategic / business partner that HR has promised for many, many years and to some degree has not yet delivered on. You see it in the surveys, you see it in what Brenda was talking about. So how does that truly become enabled? And part of that enablement is freeing up the back office and transactional process areas of HR so that it can focus on these more strategic elements. The other thing, quite frankly, is a sales pitch about what HR can and should do for the business, because it's interesting, we do many, many stakeholder reviews and analysis and questionnaires on functions as part of our work. And it's quite often telling that when you ask the business or the organization about what it expects from HR versus what HR expects from itself, there's often a gap there where HR thinks it should be doing more than it's actually doing. And the enterprise or organization is actually may be quite happy with. And the trouble with the second part of that is if the organization is happy with what HR is giving, one, it may not know what HR can do additionally, and two, there isn't that necessarily that emphasis or pressure or desire to have HR improve, which can have implications on the investment in technology for HR, which is a classic thing I hear, that HR doesn't get enough investment in technology. Well, if the business doesn't respect what HR can do for them, then they won't be pushing for it. So there's all sorts of implications around that. The second element is digital, and this impacts every part of the business as well as HR. So that's what we're going to focus on in this section. This is just something I've said, so it's on the screen here. Transformation is inevitable, and you may have heard this comment about the fourth industrial revolution. Well, it's coming, so you can't ignore the fourth industrial revolution. And if you do, you're going to fall further and further behind and become obsolete, which is what I heard Brenda say earlier on. If you don't grasp the new world, you will become obsolete. That's not just HR, but that's a general business statement. You might ask me, hold on, Phil, what do you mean by the fourth industrial revolution? Well, just FYI, and just for kicks, these are the four industrial revolutions, basically. The first was the water and steam power industrial revolution, which mechanized production. The second industrial revolution was the use of electric power, which moved from sort of point in time siloed production to mass production. So electric power led to mass production. The third industrial revolution, sometimes also called the digital revolution, was the move from analog, electronic, and mechanical devices to digital. So really the move from analog to digital, and combined with that, the PC, the Internet of Things, and the ICT, the Internet specifically, and information and communications technology. That was the third industrial revolution. So we are currently going through what some people characterize as the fourth industrial revolution, which includes a lot of technologies you may have heard of, robotics, which I've mentioned, or robotics both in hardware and software, artificial intelligence, machine learning, which isn't listed there, blockchain, nanotechnology, quantum computing, biotech, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, etc. So anyway, I'll move on, but that's what we mean by fourth industrial revolution. So what's the opportunity for HR? Well, it's huge, right? Imagine if your HR function can actually receive and comprehend HR relevant data, not misinformation, not islands of untrusted data, but actually receive trusted data that HR can understand effectively. That's the first thing. And then HR using technologies can gather and produce trend analysis and predictive trends that support the employee community, both at the employee base and at the business level. Then HR can share that amongst the employee and across the company in an effective, desktop-driven push way, suggest actions for improvements, provide analytics and analysis of trends and current practices and historical trends and future trends and opportunities and sensitivity analysis and etc. And then, of course, respond to queries in an automated way through chatbots or IVR, interactive voice response, or whatever. So this can move HR from a non-automated to a highly automated, or sometimes called hyper-automated state. Okay, so I've touched on a couple of these, but just to list a few more of these within the sort of process side. You got robotic, you may have heard these expressions, but I'm not going to read all of this. And as the question just asked, we will share these slides so you can see this, but you've got robotic desktop automation, robotic process automation, digitized robotic process automation, machine learning and artificial intelligence, and then you've got blockchain, etc. on the top. But robotic desktop automation is basically, as it sounds, automation of processes on the desktop. So literally you have a bot that sits on your desktop and helps you to process transactions. Excellent. Then you've got robotic process automation, which can either be on the desktop or be on a server-based activity where it automates human activities, again, that are manual, repetitive, and rule-based, but tends to be more integrated, more service-based, with a combination of desktop and server-based and coordination between applications. Then you've got digitized RPA, which is, I mentioned it already, but self-serve, mobile, web-based digitization, which can actually run themselves with very little human intervention and update its own analysis on the go. So that's what digitized RPA is. Machine learning is effective in extension of robotics, but including analytics and decision engines. And it basically takes lots of data and produces algorithms and gives what if analysis and basically uses that data to make improvements and inform decisions. And then, of course, finally, you have artificial intelligence, which is the latest trend out there, which enables machines to think like humans and actually be involved with problem solving and reasoning and language processing, etc. So those are some of the technologies. Now, there's sort of a trend in there. Robotic desktop automation and robotic process automation is becoming really prevalent in every business and organization we work with. They are becoming more and more prevalent. Machine learning and AI, not so much in terms of back office, but that's where the trend's going. So as you become more aware of these, and we'll touch on these a little bit in a minute as well, you should be looking at all of these opportunities for your HR function. Okay, so when you're thinking about robotic process automation, RDA or RPA, robotic desktop / process automation, what are you looking at? You're looking at highly manual, repetitive processes. Basically, are the best for this technology. Preferably rules-based, preferably higher volumes, lower complexity, preferably, I keep saying preferably because it's not exclusively, lower exception rates, stable processes, processes performed by large teams, and what's sometimes called swivel chair processes. What that means is you're literally working on a desktop here, you swivel the chair and you work on a mainframe here or another computer here. And so you basically move between applications and tasks. And those are things are very good for RPA and RDA. So within HR, what should you do? Well, you should do a process assessment. And this is just a splash on a page of potential processes or sub-processes where you would determine whether there's a high potential for automation, a medium potential, or a low potential. Now, these aren't, hard and fast, because even within these, for example, onboarding new hires, it says low potential for automation, but actually that's really because it's talking more about the people aspect of onboarding. So it's more of the bringing people on, talking to them, engaging with them, introducing to people, etc. That's what they mean by the lower potential. We mean by the lower potential. But certain onboarding processes are still very technical, process-driven, manual, repetitive. They can be RPA'd. But this is just a sort of a higher level view. So again, selecting candidates says lower potential because that's thinking more about the face-to-face interaction. However, of course, in terms of screening resumes, which you see above it, sourcing and screening candidates, that's high potential for automation. And then if you go into some of the other main HR pillars, developments and rewards, etc., you see a lot of other opportunities. For example, managing employee performance from a systematic perspective can be automated through RPA. Obviously, the conversations that happen after that, no, not so much. But anyway, there's a mix of high, medium, and low. And so we always recommend do this sort of process assessment, process suitability assessment, as we call it, for your function, and then drill down and determine what's the most likely candidates for RPA. And then you move forward with a proof of concept pilot, and then you can roll it out. And we've done this with a number of organizations. That this isn't a presentation on RPA, but we can give you, if you're interested in examples in HR specifically of RPA of all processes. Okay, moving further up that value chain I mentioned, you've also got machine learning. So you've got some more basic machine learning and advanced machine learning. And this is actually from the source of this is the HR Technology, Beginner's Guide to AI in HR. You can see that reference in the bottom left. So on the left-hand side, you can use machine learning to detect anomalies, identify exceptions or patterns. You can use it for background verification, which is used today. You can do an analysis for employee transition rate and try to identify those at higher risk of leaving the organization and proactively engage with them and make efforts to talk to those people and retain them. You've got content personalization, which is huge, of course, these days, providing a more personalized employee experience by using predictive analytics to recommend career path changes, performance development training programs, etc. So that's what we mean by content personalization. And then more advanced these days, you have speech recognition technologies, which understand human voice and accents and can determine how to respond to those as part of your customer service interface. You've got chatbots, which I'm sure we've all seen, which use natural language processing and other technologies to understand the way people are requesting and writing information, requesting support. We've got recommendation engines, which use digital learning to make recommendations about personal training. They use big data and what's called deep learning platforms and experience to help improve the pathways for individual employees to develop and grow, both within the organization and even in their personal lives. And then image and video recognition, which is interesting and pretty scary, to be honest with you, but it's talking about using videos and photos to make assessments across population groups to identify for example, best candidates. I'm not saying you necessarily always going to use that last one, but all this technology is out there to help HR. And if you haven't started looking at this, of course you should do, and then determine an appropriate roadmap. We would recommend a roadmap for intelligent automation, as we call it, working with your IT team, in partnership with your IT team, making sure that there's a consistency in approach and alignment with your technology roadmap. Okay, I'll keep going because in the interest of time, but if anybody has any questions, if you can open up and ask, otherwise we'll take questions at the end. Okay, so if you're thinking about transforming your HR function or transforming any of your functions, to be honest, where would you start? So just a couple of slides in here about some of the things you might think about and some of the questions we sometimes get asked. So one of the questions we get asked is, and you see on the chart on the left-hand side, what should you do first? Should you implement a new technology? And I will say this is probably more prevalent historically speaking, because it was about big ERP systems changes rather than today, where you have these intelligent automation tools, which tend to be more high impact, quick investment, fast deployment, high ROI. So even this is being changed by the fourth industrial revolution. But basically, if you're thinking of a system change like implementing PeopleSoft or re-implementing PeopleSoft or going to an ERP or moving off to other systems, that's what we mean by the system change on the right, which is route B. Route C is where you change the organization before any significant technology system changes, which is, for example, you change reporting lines, you change locations of people, you change processes as far as you can with existing technologies. That's what we mean by route C, so for example, you could move to the operating models that Brenda was talking about earlier, where you had the business partnering, COEs and shared services. Could you move to that model without a system change? Yes, to some degree, although there are certain enabling technologies you need, but that's what route C means. And then route A is what we sometimes call big bang, which is doing them both at the same time. So maybe implementing a new platform and implementing a new organizational change at the same time to move to a new operating model. And when we talk about operating model, we're talking about the classic people, process, technology, and client or internal customer, which I'll come back to later as critical success factors. So what's the preferred route? Well, again, we have generally found that it's a route A or a route C or a hybrid of route B. In other words, just implementing an ERP platform on its own without any organizational change, one, is extremely difficult unless you're a command and control organization, and two, can actually be suboptimal if you haven't changed the operating models to support it, because you end up just having technology either ignored or not understanding how processes are done. So route B, historically speaking, has not been the preferred way. Route A is the bigger bang, is some organizations go that way, and that's fine, but obviously it's a bit higher risk. Route C is usually where we go a hybrid thereof, which is organizational change and then technology, or some technology supporting organizational change, or a close linkage between a system implementation and organizational. So for example, if you have an ERP rollout and then you have the organizational change piggyback off that. So anyway, these are three different ways. The full-blown ERP implementation on its own without any organizational change is not what we would normally recommend. Okay, so if you're thinking of moving forward with a transformation for your HR function, this is there's a lot more behind this, and we're very happy to talk to anyone about what this breaks down. But really, first of all, you need to do your assessment. You need to understand your current state. You need to do a roadmap to a degree, you need a financial business case. The financial business case is sort of two elements to it. One, to act as a way to approve the investment that needs to be made, and the benefits can be both monetary and non-monetary, of course, but you should make the attempt to do that, and then that can help get the sign off from the business, and you might want to partner with other functions to do that to get some sort of scale, especially when it involves technology. But understand your current state, design a roadmap, produce a financial business case, get sign off. And as part of that, make sure you engage with your stakeholder interviews, understand your activities, etc. So that's the first phase. Once you get approval to move beyond that into actual design, then you move forward with designing your operating model and all its components, the templates, the processes, technologies, training plans, etc. Then you build that operating model, build any facilities, and then you deploy. And deploy is, we often get asked, what's the best way to deploy? But at the end of the day, it's always about the people, right? It's always about the location. So your deployment should always have the emphasis on the people impact. So we generally say by location, by process, rather than process by location, because it's at the location or the country or the business unit that the people sit. So you want to have the whole change management program around a transformation focused around that when it comes to deployment. And then, of course, you'll be looking to stabilize operations once you've completed that transformation. So as you think about your HR team and quite frankly, the broader employee community in your organization, what should you be thinking about? Well, a lot of things, and we've touched on some of these. But firstly, you need to think about your current workforce, your current team. Are they in match skills to the right roles? Do they have the appropriate mix of technical skills and experience? So for example, we touched on this earlier, but in the COEs, you need what we call more professional and technical skills. Tend to be more specific qualifications around those functions, those services in COE. Whereas in transaction administrative, it's actually more about process skills, customer service skills, technology skills. So think about that. And then, by the way, I've sometimes heard this statement, well, if we go to this more specialist model that you're recommending with COEs, shared services, business partners, isn't that less attractive to your employee community? The answer is yes, if you do nothing else, but no, if you have it as a proper, skills assessment and rotation program where people can move through the various teams. And actually within the back office, if you have real strong customer service training, real strong technical training, process training, it's a huge benefit and an opportunity for the people there, and then they can move to the COE, to business partnering, and move between roles. That's your opportunity. So move away from the generalist model to more of the specialist model is one of the things we say. So assess your workforce, make sure you understand the skills, analytics, and technologies and social aspects of what's required, especially in the current environment, and then of course move to mitigate any gaps. Enabling functions are really the teams that work alongside the operating model that Brenda was talking about earlier. So you need to think about account management. So how are you going to manage your relationship with your internal customers? Performance measurement. How are you going to be accountable for your performance? How are you going to measure that performance? How are you going to report on that performance? How are you going to take action on that performance? Then you've got continuous improvement and process improvement, which can be Lean Six Sigma. It can be many of the opportunities around process improvement that are out there, but continuous improvement with appropriate skills. And of course, change management communication. These are what we call enabling functions that need to go with any transformation, not just a transformation, but the operation of the new model. You need to stay up to date. And we've touched on some of these trends in this meeting today, this presentation workshop today. Stay up to date. What are the latest trends, both externally and internally? And ensure that you have access to the latest in design thinking skills required to support your HR function of the future. And then finally, drilling down on this fourth industrial revolution, make sure you have the digital skills. Now, you can either set up your own team within HR, or you can build off a COE that might be sitting in another function or in IT, but you need to work out how to engage with that team and upskill your HR function and the broader employee base with those digital skills. Okay, last section, and then we'll take Q&A. Jordan, are we doing good for time? I think so.
Yes, no, we're okay. We have 10 minutes left.
Okay, so I'll spend a couple of minutes on this, and then we have a few minutes for questions. So I mentioned this earlier on. So whenever you look towards transformation, you need to think about, you always hear about people, process, and technology, but it's about the four aspects. And when we say client or customer, we really mean internal client, your employee base, your management team, etc. It's how do you serve your internal community effectively? And this is one of the things we get to shared services. What distinguishes proper shared services from corporate centralization? It's effectively treating the internal client / customer as if they were an external client / customer. And you need to think about that when you transform your HR service operating model. So these are some of the things you need to think about. Account management, which I touched on earlier, how you're going to intercontact client contact, which Brenda touched on with the operating model and the tiered structure earlier, performance standards, measures we talked about, service partnership agreements as opposed to service level agreements. It's about partnering with your internal client, not blaming each other. Customer feedback, metrics, and continual improvement, which I mentioned earlier. And then you've got process, which is classic. You need to try and eliminate duplication. You need to standardize where possible. You need to document. You need to eliminate exceptions. But where you can't eliminate exceptions, for whatever reason, local requirement, local legal requirement, local cultural requirement, then they should become part of the approved exceptions to your processes. That's on the top right. People, clearly, we've talked a little about this, but assess your skills. I mentioned moving more from a generalist model to a specialist model with appropriate interaction and integration between team. Assess your competencies, as I mentioned, match skills, engage with your management, senior leadership, appropriate training, formal change management, and making sure your work environment is conducive to team working. And Brenda touched on all that a little earlier with COVID-19, but in general, it's the work environment would be that remote, virtual, on-site, off-site, or whatever, a mix thereof. And finally, we touched on this with technology, all the tools that are out there, the latest in trends, but some of the older service tools, ERP, case management is critical, document management is also critical, workflow is critical. Think about how all of these are going to enable this future state for transformation. Include that in that roadmap that I talked about earlier on, and then in the deployment plan. I've actually pretty much touched on this already, but when we talk about the internal client, we talk about the 9 critical success factors. So again, we're going to share this, but these, we call them 9. So think about your client interaction framework, your customer interaction framework, your service delivery framework. Those terms are used interchangeably, but it's around account management, how customer contact management, how do you communicate with your internal customer, service partnership agreements I've mentioned, how do you receive feedback, for example, from satisfaction surveys, how do you measure performance, how do you report on the performance, how do you capture and process your processes, are they end-to-end, are they kept up to date, are they shared, are they relevant, are they trained on, that's on process control, continuous improvement I mentioned. And in the bottom right-hand corner there, you have what we call recharging. To the extent, how is HR going to charge for, receive budget for its services? Ultimately, I touched on this earlier with decision support. You have to pay for HR, just like you have to pay for anything else, finance. So you need to determine the appropriate return on investment, or is it a legal need, in which case you want to be as efficient as possible? Is it a process you want to be as efficient and effective as possible? Or is it a value-adding decision support activity? How are you going to measure that? And how are you going to be paid and receive compensation for that? So that's the CIF. So with that, I think we have a few minutes left to take any questions. So Jordan, do we have any questions that are coming that we can, Brenda and I can take?
Yes, we actually have a couple of questions. So the first one was from Mark Hickenbottom, and he wanted to know where you see responsibility for HR technology lying in your models.
That's a great question. I sort of touched on that a little bit just towards the end there, Mark, but yeah. So when you get of course, you have to partner with your internal IT organization for sure, but we have seen a lot with these new technologies around intelligent automation, RPA, et cetera, those being owned within the function, at least initially, okay? And then as you grow, you can then either link up with another part of the function or set up a COE. And the Center of Expertise for RPA, for example, can sit in a shared service center or within a function or within IT. All we're saying is that through the intelligent automation, the skills actually are sitting more in the function than may have historically been the place. Now, I was actually on a call with somebody else yesterday, Mark, and we were talking about establishing a global ERP specialization and how that would functionally sit. And that was a good one. So in that sense, you'd have a sort of COE type of team, which would absolutely be at least dotted line reporting to the function, but should be centralized located. So the answer is you need to partner with your IT organization, but with the new technologies, there is more of an empowerment at the functional level. But as you grow, think about whether you set up a COE that can cross functions while still enabling digital skill sets within HR. I can talk about this for ages, but I'm going to stop because see if there's any other questions, but maybe we can follow up afterwards, Mark, if you want more on that.
So we do have 2 more questions and 4 minutes to spare. So the first one is by Jim Herzog, and he wants to know, what impact do you see culture playing in organizational versus system changes?
I'm going to ask Brenda to respond to that one. Brenda, can you take that one? I can add to, but can you go answer that one on culture?
Okay, I guess I can start with huge. I think that culture is, we've all heard this before, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And the reality is when you're making a shift, a transformational change, like we're talking about here, in order for HR to earn the credibility, step up to the plate, do what's needed to be done in the organization, culture is probably one of the key elements. So when we talk about that, change management is key. Project management is key. We've got to make sure that as we're working through the organization and implementing transformational change, that both at the technical level and the people level, change management is critical.
Yeah, and broader speaking, culture, as Brenda mentioned, is fundamental, and HR should be part of that drive to cultural change. Rather, this is a statement. I'm going to make a statement. HR's role is not to protect the culture, right? HR's role is to understand the culture and allow transformation to happen within that culture. So do you have to change culture to be transformative? To some degree, yes, but you have to understand the culture to enable that to happen, right? HR's role is not to be the arbiter and guardian of culture. That's what I would say. It's on behalf of the business, needs to understand it to allow transformation to change.
Yeah.
Jordan, any other questions? I think we've got a couple of
So
minutes.
we do just have another question asking about the entire presentation. So I want to let the entire audience know we have been recording the session and we've made it available, but and that is available if you reach out to Phil through the Meeting Hub or Brenda through the Meeting Hub or via online their emails. But I'm mindful that I want to give Phil and Brenda closing statements. So in our last minute here, what are your thoughts on what do you want the main audience to take away, the most important things?
So Brenda, would you like to go first, and I'll finish up?
Okay, yeah, so just a couple of things. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. And I do want to say, just in closing comments or remarks, that the fourth industrial revolution is coming. And in terms of what we saw with the reports that are coming out even this year, so Deloitte's 2020 report on the state of the workforce and HR as impact in the organization, it's critical for HR to step up to the plate in order to continue to move towards being more effective and not become redundant.
Thanks, Brenda. And I would just like to add to Brenda, thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully we've helped you in your thought process as you move to the next stage for next generation HR. I will say that what we often do is, if we get some questions that people send on to us afterwards or through the Q&A, what Sarah from Chazey will do is we'll issue a Q&A with a sort of written response to that. So if you guys have any follow-up questions that we didn't get to answer here or you think about afterwards, please send them to us, and we'll probably issue a sort of Q&A update on this presentation. We found that's been quite helpful for people who've attended these sessions, and actually those who haven't, who've listened afterwards. So we'll do that as well. But yeah, with that, I think we're out of time. So thank you very much for your time. the opportunities out there for sure. So we just would urge you guys to go out there and grab that opportunity wherever you may be. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Brenda. I think that was a fantastic idea for the extra questions. If everyone wants to move over to the next session now, in 5 minutes time, we're going to be looking at a fireside chat on redesigning processes for operational excellence through employee centricity. And that's going to be between two VPs. Monica Azali-Bello, the Global Director for GBS People Services with General Motors, and Paul Hibbsy, the VP for Organizational Effectiveness at Stanley Black & Decker. So if everyone wants to sort of start going over there, I want to thank Phil and Brenda again.
Thanks, John. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.